Abigail Whitaker's hands were shaking so hard she couldn't sign her own name. The pen slipped. Ink bled across the paper like a wound. Across the table sat Rhett Callahan, the most feared man in Colorado Territory. A man who buried men without headstones. A man who owned half the valley and terrified the other half. And in 30 seconds, he would own her too. She pressed the pen down again. Her father wouldn't look at her. Nobody in that courthouse would. She signed, and her life ended. Or so she thought. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and stay until the very end. You won't believe where Abby's journey takes her. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're. The ink wasn't even dry when banker Edgar Whitmore smiled. Not a real smile. The kind a man wears when he's won something he didn't earn. He folded the contract carefully, tucked it inside his coat, and tapped it twice like a man patting a loaded gun. "Congratulations, Miss Whitaker," he said. Or should I say, Mrs. Callahan. Abby didn't answer. Her fingers were still wrapped around the pen, white-knuckled, frozen. Like if she held on long enough, she could scratch out what she'd just done. But she couldn't. It was done. Her father, Samuel Whitaker, sat 2 chairs down, hat in his lap, eyes on the floor. He hadn't spoken a single word since they'd walked into the Boulder courthouse that morning. Not when the judge read the terms. Not when Whitmore laid out the contract. Not when Abby's voice cracked on the word, "I do." Nothing. Just silence from a man who used to sing hymns while mending fences. Rhett Callahan stood near the window, arms crossed, still as stone. He hadn't moved during the entire proceeding, hadn't smiled, hadn't shifted, hadn't so much as cleared his throat. He just watched. Those dark eyes, quiet, unreadable, resting on nothing and everything at once. The judge closed his book. "It's official. You're married under territorial law." Abby set the pen down. Her hand left an ink stain on the table. She didn't wipe it. Outside, the Colorado sun hammered down on the dirt street like punishment. Abby walked 3 steps ahead of everyone because she couldn't stand to walk beside any of them. Her father caught up first. "Abby." "Don't." "Sweetheart, I didn't have a choice." She stopped, turned, looked him dead in the face. "You had a choice, Daddy. You just didn't choose me." Samuel's mouth opened, then closed. His chin trembled once, just once, before he pressed his hat to his chest and looked away. Whitmore appeared behind them like smoke. "The wagon's ready, Mrs. Callahan. Your husband's ranch is a half-day's ride. I'd suggest you settle in before nightfall." "He ain't my husband," Abby said. Whitmore chuckled. "The law says different." "The law didn't ask me." She turned before he could answer and walked toward the wagon, where Rhett Callahan was already waiting. He stood beside the team of horses, 2 big roans, holding the reins loosely in one hand. He didn't offer to help her up, didn't reach for her trunk. He just waited. Abby climbed up herself. She sat on the far edge of the bench, as far from him as wood allowed. Rhett climbed up on the other side, took the reins, clicked his tongue once. The wagon lurched forward, and Boulder disappeared behind them in dust. They rode in silence for the first hour. Abby kept her eyes straight ahead, her jaw set, her hands clasped in her lap so tight her knuckles ached. She could feel him beside her, the sheer physical weight of him. Rhett Callahan wasn't a small man. He sat the wagon bench like he sat a throne, easy, unhurried, like a man who'd never been rushed by anything or anyone in his life. She hated that. She hated how calm he was. She hated how the whole town trembled at his name, and he sat here like he was driving to Sunday church. Finally, she couldn't stand it. "You gonna say anything?" she asked. Rhett didn't look at her. What would you like me to say? I don't know. Maybe explain why you just bought a woman like a head of cattle? He was quiet for a long moment. The wagon wheels groaned over a dry creek bed. I didn't buy you, he said. Then what do you call it? I call it settling a debt your father couldn't pay. Abby's stomach turned. So I'm a debt payment. No, ma'am. You're a free woman who signed a contract. I didn't have a choice. Now he looked at her, just briefly. Those dark eyes, steady, deep, impossible to read. There's always a choice, Miss Whitaker. Yours just happened to be between two bad ones. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It's Mrs. Callahan now, she said bitterly. Remember? He turned back to the road. Only if you want it to be. She didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing, and the silence returned. They arrived at the Callahan ranch just before sundown. Abby had expected something dark, something twisted. A man like Rhett Callahan, a man the whole territory feared, should live in a place that matched the stories. But the ranch hands were already moving when the wagon pulled in. A tall, sun-weathered man in a brown hat jogged over and caught the lead horse's bridle. Boss, welcome back. He glanced at Abby, tipped his hat. Ma'am? Luke, Rhett said, climbing down. This is Mrs. Callahan. The man, Luke Brennan, she'd learn later, didn't blink, didn't smirk, just nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ma'am, anything you need, you just ask. Abby didn't answer. She was watching the ranch hands. 6, maybe 7 men, all working, all moving with purpose. No one was drunk. No one was fighting. No one was lounging against a fence post, spitting tobacco and making comments. They were working. Quietly, efficiently, respectfully. That didn't match the stories either. A woman appeared on the porch, stout, silver-haired, apron dusted with flour. She wiped her hands and came down the steps with the kind of authority that had nothing to do with size. You must be Abigail, she said, not unkind, not warm either, just direct. I'm Martha Doyle. I run this house. I didn't ask anyone to run anything for me, Abby said. Martha studied her for a moment. Then the faintest ghost of a smile crossed her face. Good. Then we'll get along fine. Rhett carried Abby's trunk himself. He didn't ask one of the hands, didn't pass it off to Luke. He picked it up like it weighed nothing and walked it through the front door, down a hallway, and into a room at the far end. Abby followed, her heart hammering. This was it. This was the part the stories warned about. The room behind the closed door. The part no one talked about in daylight. Rhett set the trunk at the foot of the bed, straightened up, looked at her once, that same unreadable expression, and then stepped back. This is your room, he said. Abby blinked. My room? Yes, ma'am. And where do you... Down the hall. She stared at him. You're not... He shook his head once. No. The word landed like a stone in still water. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. There's a lock on the inside, he said quietly. Use it if you want. Then he stepped out and closed the door. Abby stood in the middle of that room for a long time. Her hands were shaking again, but different this time. Not from fear, from confusion. She crossed to the door, touched the lock. A heavy iron bolt, solid and smooth. She slid it shut. Then she pressed her forehead against the wood and closed her eyes. On the other side, she heard his boots, slow, steady, walking away. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in a bed that was too soft, too clean, too quiet. and stared at the ceiling while every terrible story she'd ever heard about Rhett Callahan played through her mind like a fever dream. He killed a man in Durango with his bare hands. He burned a homesteader's cabin for looking at him wrong. He drove 3 families off their land in a single winter. The monster of Colorado territory. But monsters don't give you your own room. Monsters don't point out the lock. Monsters don't walk away. Morning came hard and bright. Abby hadn't unpacked, hadn't changed. She'd fallen asleep in her dress sometime around 3 and woke with the sun cutting through the curtains like a blade. She unbolted the door carefully. The hallway was empty. She followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen, where Martha was already moving. Bacon in the skillet, biscuits in the oven, coffee pot on the stove. "Sit," Martha said without turning around. "I don't need to be waited on."
"Didn't say you did. Said sit."
Abby sat. Martha poured her coffee. Black, strong enough to strip paint. "He's been up since 4, Martha said. "Who?" Martha gave her a look. "Who do you think?" Abby wrapped her hands around the cup. "Does he always get up that early?" "Every day for 15 years. Rain, snow, sickness, doesn't matter. That man works harder than any hand on this ranch." She set a plate of biscuits on the table. "And before you ask, no, he doesn't expect you to do anything. Not cook, not clean, not serve." "Then what does he expect?" Martha stopped, turned, looked at her with eyes that had seen more than they'd ever tell. "I reckon he expects you to decide who you want to be. That's about it." Abby spent the first 3 days avoiding Rhett like he was a rattlesnake coiled in every doorway. She ate when he wasn't in the kitchen. She walked the property when he was in the barn. She sat on the porch only after she'd confirmed he was out riding the north pasture. But avoidance has a way of creating its own kind of attention. On the 4th morning, Luke Brennan found her standing by the corral fence, watching 2 young horses chase each other in circles. "You ride, ma'am?" "I used to." "Well, the bay mare there, Juniper, she's gentle as they come. Boss said you're welcome to ride her any time." Abby frowned. "He said that?" "Yes, ma'am. Said to make sure you know you're free to go anywhere on the property. No restrictions." "Free," she repeated. Luke tipped his hat. "That's the word he used." On the 5th day, she couldn't avoid him anymore. She came around the corner of the barn, and there he was, crouched beside a sick calf, his big hands gentle as a preacher's, pressing a warm cloth against the animal's side. The calf was breathing shallow and fast. Rhett murmured something low, too quiet for her to hear, and the animal settled. Abby stopped walking. She'd seen rough men handle livestock before. Her father's hands had kicked sick calves to make them stand. One had shot a lame horse in front of her when she was 12. But this... Rhett's hands moved like they were touching something sacred. Patient. Careful. Like the calf's pain was his own. He didn't look up, but he knew she was there. "She got into some bad water," he said. "Creek bed's been stagnant since June. I'm moving the herd to the upper pasture tomorrow." "Will she make it?" He paused. "If she fights, she will." Something in the way he said it made Abby think he wasn't just talking about the calf. She stood there for another minute. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She knelt down beside him. "Show me what to do," she said. He looked at her, really looked at her, not the quick glances from the wagon or the doorway. A full, steady gaze that held weight and warmth and something she couldn't name. "Hold the cloth here," he said. "Keep it warm. I'll get more water." He stood and walked toward the well. Abby pressed the cloth against the calf's side and felt the tiny heartbeat fluttering beneath her hand. Fast, fragile, fighting, like her own. That evening, Martha set 3 places at the dinner table. Abby looked at the third setting. "Is someone joining us?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "It's his house." When Rhett came in, he'd washed up, changed his shirt. His hair was damp. He pulled out a chair and sat without ceremony. "Calf's breathing easier," he said to no one in particular. "Good," Abby said. It was the first civil word she'd spoken to him in 5 days. He glanced at her. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something quieter, something like relief. They ate in near silence, but it was different from the wagon silence. That had been the silence of strangers forced together. This was the silence of 2 people carefully making room. After dinner, Rhett stood, carried his plate to the basin, then paused at the kitchen doorway. "Thank you," he said. Abby looked up. "For what?" "For helping with the calf." "She's just a calf." "Everything matters, Miss Whitaker." He caught himself. "Mrs. Callahan." She held his gaze for a moment. "Abby," she said quietly. "Just Abby." Something shifted in his eyes. Something deep and guarded cracked open, just a sliver, before he covered it again. "Abby," he repeated, like he was testing how it felt. Then he nodded once and walked away. That night, she didn't bolt the lock. She thought about it. She stood at the door with her hand on the iron bolt and her heart pounding like hooves on hardpack. Every story said lock it. Every instinct said lock it. But something else, something small, stubborn, and reckless, said don't. She left it open. And in the morning, when she opened the door, nothing had changed. The hallway was empty. The house was quiet. And somewhere outside, she could hear Rhett Callahan's voice, low, steady, patient, talking to the horses like they were the only ones in the world worth trusting. She stood in that doorway for a long time, and for the first time since she'd signed that paper in the courthouse, she didn't feel sold. She felt seen. But what Abby didn't know, what no one on that ranch knew, was that Edgar Whitmore was already making plans. He sat in his office in Boulder that same morning, ledger open, pen moving. The Callahan marriage wasn't supposed to hold. It was supposed to break her, break him. Give Whitmore legal grounds to seize both properties when the contract inevitably collapsed. But 5 days in, and no word of trouble. No screaming, no running, no annulment petition. Whitmore closed the ledger. "If the fire won't start on its own," he muttered, "then I'll light it myself." He pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him and began to write. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Luke brought it in from the gatepost where the mail rider had left it, turned it over once, and handed it to Rhett without a word. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, stamped with the seal of the First Bank of Boulder. Rhett opened it at the kitchen table while Abby was pouring herself coffee. She watched his face. Nothing changed, not a muscle, not a flicker. He read the entire letter, both pages, folded it neatly, and set it beside his plate. "Trouble?" Martha asked from the stove. "No," Rhett said, but his hand stayed on the letter a beat too long. Abby set the coffee pot down. "What does Whitmore want?" Rhett looked at her. Something passed through his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she'd read the situation that fast. "He wants to inspect the property lines," Rhett said. "Claims there's a boundary dispute between Callahan land and your father's old acreage." "There's no dispute." That boundary's been marked since before I was born. I know. Then why's he coming? Rhett picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. Because he wants to see if we're falling apart. The word we landed between them like a dropped glass. Neither one picked it up. Martha turned from the stove, eyes sharp. That snake's been circling this ranch since your daddy built it, Rhett. Don't give him an inch. I don't intend to. When's he coming? Abby asked. Friday. 3 days. Abby's stomach tightened. She'd spent the last week learning the rhythms of this ranch. The quiet mornings, the steady work, the careful distance between her and Rhett that was shrinking by inches she couldn't measure. And now Whitmore was dragging his poison right to the front door. I want to be there, she said. Rhett shook his head. You don't need to deal with him. I've been dealing with him my whole life. He held my father's debt over our heads for 6 years. I know how he works. Which is exactly why I should be there, she set her jaw. He expects me to hide. That's what he wants. A scared bride locked in a back room. Rhett studied her for a long moment. All right, he said. Martha snorted. Lord help that banker. Abby almost smiled. Almost. She picked up her coffee and walked out to the porch. And she didn't realize until she was halfway through the cup that she'd just fought to stand beside Rhett Callahan. Not against him. Beside him. That thought unsettled her more than Whitmore's letter ever could. The next 3 days moved like a river picking up speed. Abby threw herself into the ranch in ways she hadn't planned. She helped Martha reorganize the kitchen stores, tallied the grain inventory when Luke mentioned it was overdue, and spent 2 hours in the barn with a hand named Colton, who was trying to break a young stallion with more force than sense. You're scaring him, she told Colton flatly. The young hand blinked. Ma'am? The horse. You're yanking the bit every time he resists. He's not fighting you. He's afraid of you. Colton looked at Luke, who was leaning against the fence post with his arms crossed. Luke shrugged. Lady knows horses. Abby stepped into the corral. She didn't take the reins from Colton. She just stood near the stallion's head and let him come to her. Slow. Patient. Her hand out, palm up, waiting. The stallion snorted, pawed the dirt, then stepped forward and pressed his nose into her hand. See, she said, he don't need to be broken. He needs to be asked. From across the yard, Rhett watched. He'd come out of the tack room with a saddle over his shoulder and stopped mid-stride. Just stood there, watching this woman who was supposed to be a debt payment, a legal formality, a name on a contract, calm a horse that 3 of his best hands couldn't touch. Luke appeared beside him. She's something, boss. Rhett said nothing, but he didn't move either, not for a long time. That evening, something shifted at the dinner table. It was small, so small that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it. Rhett asked Abby about the grain count. Not politely, not formally, the way a man asks a partner about the business they share. We're short about 200 pounds of oats, she said. The summer order didn't account for the new horses Luke brought in last month. I'll send word to the feed store in Boulder. Don't use Whitmore's supplier. He marks up 15% and the quality's poor. There's a mill in Golden. My father used them before the debt got bad. Fair prices, honest weight. Rhett set down his fork. You know the name? Patterson and Sons. Ask for the old man, not the son. The son'll try to charm you. The old man just does the math. Martha, standing at the counter with a dish rag in her hand, looked back and forth between them like she was watching the first green shoot push through hard ground. Rhett nodded. I'll send Luke in the morning. I can write the order tonight, Abby said. I kept my father's books for 3 years. I know what a ranch this size needs. I don't doubt that. It was the way he said it. No hesitation, no surprise, just fact. Like he'd known it all along and was simply waiting for her to say it out loud. Abby looked down at her plate. Her throat felt tight. No man had ever said, "I don't doubt that," to her in her entire life. Not once. Friday came in hot and heavy. Abby was on the porch when the buggy appeared on the road. She recognized Whitmore's rig before she could see his face, that black lacquered carriage that looked like a coffin on wheels. Rhett came out of the house and stood beside her. Not close, but close enough. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know. That's why I'm doing it." He glanced at her. Something moved in his face. Not a smile, not relief. Something fiercer, something that looked dangerously close to respect. Whitmore's carriage pulled up in a cloud of dust. The banker stepped down like he was arriving at his own property. Smooth, unhurried, that same silk and poison smile he wore like a second skin. "Mr. Callahan," he tipped his hat. Then his eyes found Abby, and the smile widened. "Mrs. Callahan, my, still here." "Where else would I be?" Abby said. "Well, I simply assumed, given the circumstances, that a young woman of your sensibilities might have found the arrangement difficult." "You assumed wrong." Whitmore's smile didn't waver, but something behind it shifted. He turned to Rhett. "Shall we discuss the boundary matter?" "Discuss whatever you came to discuss," Rhett said. "Then leave." They moved to the porch. Martha brought water that nobody touched. Whitmore produced a surveyor's map from his case and spread it on the table with the care of a man revealing a winning hand. As you can see, the eastern boundary of the Whitaker property, now absorbed into Callahan Holdings through the marriage contract, intersects with a territorial easement that was filed in '68. "That easement expired in '71, Abby said. Whitmore blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The territorial easement. It was a 5-year provisional grant tied to the original homestead claim. My father filed the renewal in '69, and the territory confirmed the boundary in '71. Full title. No easement." "I don't believe that's—" "I have the paperwork." Silence. Whitmore's smile finally cracked. Just a fraction. Just enough. "You have the paperwork," he repeated. "In my trunk. I brought every document my father ever signed when I came here. I'm not a fool, Mr. Whitmore." Rhett said nothing. But Luke, standing by the corral fence, had to turn away to hide the grin splitting his face. Whitmore recovered quickly. He always did. He folded the map slowly, deliberately, and tucked it back into his case. "Well, that's thorough of you, Mrs. Callahan. I commend your diligence." "I don't need your commendation." "No." His voice hardened just a shade. "I suppose you don't." He stood, buttoned his coat despite the heat. "I'll be on my way then, but I do hope you'll both be at the cattle auction in Denver next month. It's quite the social occasion. All of territorial society will be there." He looked at Abby when he said it. Looked at her the way a man looks at a card he hasn't played yet. "I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about your arrangement." He tipped his hat and left. The dust from his carriage hadn't even settled when Abby's hands started shaking. She gripped the porch railing, hard. The adrenaline that had held her straight and sharp through the entire conversation drained out of her like water from a cracked bucket. And what was left was just a woman standing in the heat, trembling. "You all right?" Rhett's voice, behind her, close. "I'm fine." "You're shaking." "I said I'm fine." He didn't push. He just stood there, steady, solid, close enough that she could feel his presence like a wall between her and everything else. You knew about the easement, he said. Of course I knew. I ran that ranch's books since I was 19. Your father never mentioned it. My father never mentioned a lot of things. He was too busy drowning in whiskey and debt to remember what he had. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. She closed her eyes. I'm sorry. That wasn't... Don't apologize for the truth. She opened her eyes, turned. He was closer than she expected. 3 feet, maybe less, and the afternoon light caught the angles of his face in a way that made him look less like a monster and more like a man carrying something heavy he'd never asked anyone to help him hold. Why did you marry me? She asked. The real reason, not the debt, not the contract. The real reason. Rhett held her gaze. Because Whitmore would have sold your father's land to the railroad, and you would have had nothing. No home, no land, no name. So it was charity. No. Then what? He looked away, out toward the pasture where the cattle moved like slow brown shadows against the grass. I know what it's like to have everything taken by a man with a ledger and a smile, he said. I wasn't going to let it happen again. The word again hung in the air like gun smoke. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped off the porch and walked toward the barn. She let him go, but that word stayed with her all night. Again. What had Whitmore taken from Rhett Callahan? The answer came not from Rhett, but from Martha. It was late. The house was dark except for the kitchen lamp. Abby had come down for water and found Martha sitting at the table with a cup of tea, staring at nothing. Can't sleep? Abby asked. Haven't slept proper in 20 years. Sit. Abby sat. Martha was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You want to know about him. I didn't say, you don't have to. It's written all over your face every time he walks out of a room. Martha wrapped both hands around her cup. His mother died when he was 7. Fever. His father raised him alone on this ranch. Hardest working man I ever knew. Good man. Fair man. Sound familiar? Abby said nothing. When Rhett was 17, Whitmore called in a loan his father couldn't pay. Sound familiar? Abby's chest tightened. His father fought it. Took it to the territorial court. Lost. Whitmore seized the cattle, the equipment, half the acreage. Left them with nothing but the house and 100 acres of dirt. What happened? His father died 6 months later. Heart gave out. Rhett was 18 years old, with 100 acres, no cattle, and a name nobody trusted. Martha's voice dropped. He built it all back. Every acre, every head of cattle, every fence post. Took him 15 years, and he did it without cheating a single soul. But the stories are Whitmore's doing. Every rumor, every whispered horror story about Rhett Callahan. Who do you think planted them? A feared man can't get allies. A feared man can't get credit. A feared man can't fight a banker in court because no jury will side with a monster. Abby felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack. The way ice cracks on a river in spring. Not destruction, release. He never corrected them, she whispered. The stories. He never told anyone the truth. Who'd believe him? Martha said. That's the genius of it. Whitmore built a cage out of lies and locked Rhett inside it. And every year he squeezes a little tighter. And the marriage? The marriage was Whitmore's idea. He wanted Rhett to fail, wanted you to run, wanted the contract to collapse so he could claim fraud and take everything. Callahan land and Whitaker land in one stroke. Abby sat very still. The whole picture rearranged itself in her mind. Every piece she'd been holding, the locked door, the separate rooms, the distance, the patience, the quiet, relentless dignity of a man the world called a monster. All of it clicked into place like the tumblers of a lock she'd been trying to pick for 2 weeks. He hadn't bought her. He'd saved her. And he'd done it knowing that the very act of marrying her was exactly what his enemy wanted.
Why?
Abby's voice was barely a breath.
Why would he walk into Whitmore's trap?
Martha looked at her with eyes that held 15 years of watching a boy become a man, alone, against everything, without complaint. Because he couldn't stand by and watch it happen to someone else. Abby pressed her hand over her mouth. She didn't cry. She wouldn't cry. But something inside her shifted so hard and so fast that she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling apart. Martha reached across and covered Abby's hand with her own. "He won't tell you any of this," Martha said. "He'd rather die than ask for pity. So I'm telling you, because someone needs to know who that man really is." "I'm starting to," Abby whispered. "Good." Martha squeezed her hand once. "Now finish your water and get some sleep. You've got a ranch to help run in the morning." Abby went back to her room. She stood at the door. The lock was still unbolted. Had been for 3 nights now. She touched the iron bolt, cold under her fingers. Then she opened the door wider, all the way, left it open, and lay down in the dark, listening to the quiet house breathe around her, thinking about a boy of 18 standing in the ruins of everything his father built, making a decision that would take 15 years to prove right. She fell asleep with her hand pressed against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat. Steady now. Not afraid. The next morning, Abby found Rhett in the barn before dawn. He was saddling his horse, a big black gelding named Solomon, and he turned when he heard her boots on the dirt floor. "You're up early," he said. "I want to ride the property lines with you." He paused. "All of them?" "All of them. I need to know this land the way you know it. Every fence, every creek, every boundary Whitmore might try to challenge." Rhett studied her. "That's a full day's ride." "I know." "In this heat?" "I grew up on a ranch, Mr. Callahan. Heat doesn't scare me." "Rhett." She blinked. "What?" "If I'm calling you Abby, you call me Rhett. Fair's fair." Something warm moved through her chest. She fought it down. "Fine. Rhett. Now saddle Juniper. We're burning daylight." He almost smiled. Not quite, but closer than she'd ever seen. They rode out together as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, side by side for the first time since the wagon ride from Boulder. But this time, Abby wasn't sitting on the far edge. This time, she rode close. They covered the south pasture by mid-morning. Rhett pointed out the fence lines, the water sources, the places where the boundary markers had been set by his father 30 years ago. He spoke plainly. No embellishment, no boasting. Just facts, delivered in that low, steady voice that Abby was beginning to realize wasn't coldness at all. It was control. The control of a man who'd learned early that the world punished weakness and misread silence for threat. They stopped at the creek to water the horses. Abby slid down from Juniper and let the mare drink while she stretched the stiffness from her legs. "Whitmore mentioned the Denver auction," she said. "He did." "Are you going?" "Have to. It's where I sell the summer herd. Half the ranch's income comes from that auction." "Then I'm going with you." Rhett looked at her over Solomon's back. "It'll be public. The whole territory will be there. People will talk." "People already talk." "They'll say worse in Denver." Abby straightened up. "Let them." "You don't know what they'll say." I know exactly what they'll say. They'll say you bought a bride. They'll say I was sold like cattle. They'll say I'm either a fool or a prisoner." She met his eyes. "And I'll stand right there beside you and prove every single one of them wrong." Rhett was quiet for a long time. The creek murmured. The horses drank. "Why?" he asked. "Because Martha told me what Whitmore did to your father." The silence that followed was absolute. Rhett's hand tightened on Solomon's reins until his knuckles went white. "Martha talks too much," he said. "Martha tells the truth. Something you won't do." "It's not your fight, Abby." She stepped around the horse until she was standing in front of him. Close. Closer than she'd ever been to him by choice. "You made it my fight the day you signed that contract. You could have let Whitmore take my father's land. You could have let me end up with nothing. But you didn't." Her voice shook, not with fear, but with something harder, something forged. "So don't you dare stand there and tell me it's not my fight." Rhett looked down at her, and for the first time, the very first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't guarded, wasn't controlled, wasn't locked behind 15 years of walls and silence and survival. It was raw, open, terrified. Not of her, of what she was making him feel. "Abby," he started. "Don't." She held up her hand. "Don't say anything you're going to take back. Just let me be here. Let me help. That's all I'm asking." He swallowed hard, nodded once. "All right," he said. "Denver. Together." She nodded back. They mounted up and rode north without another word. But something between them had crossed a line that neither of them could uncross. And 40 miles east, in his office in Boulder, Edgar Whitmore finished the last of 3 letters. One to the Denver Cattlemen's Association, one to the territorial judge, and one, the one that mattered most, to a man named Cyrus Polk, a land speculator from Kansas City who owed Whitmore a favor and had no conscience left to trouble him. Whitmore sealed each letter with wax. The Callahan marriage was supposed to collapse. It was collapsing in the wrong direction. And that, Edgar Whitmore decided, simply would not do. The ride to Denver took 2 days. Abby and Rhett traveled with Luke and 3 ranch hands, driving 40 head of prime summer cattle. They camped one night along the South Platte, and Abby lay in the back of the supply wagon, staring at stars she couldn't count, while Rhett sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, saying nothing. She'd stopped expecting him to fill silence. She'd started to understand that his silence wasn't absence. It was presence, the loudest kind. Luke rode up beside her wagon the next morning. "You nervous?" he asked. "About what?" "Denver. The auction. All those people." "Should I be?" Luke tilted his hat back. "Folks in Denver ain't like folks on the ranch. They smile to your face and cut you from behind. Whitmore's got friends there. Powerful ones." "So does Rhett." Luke was quiet a moment. "Rhett's got respect. That ain't the same as friends." Abby chewed on that for the next 10 miles. They reached Denver by late afternoon. The city hit her like a wall. Noise, movement, people packed shoulder to shoulder along Larimer Street. She'd been to Denver twice in her life, both times with her father, both times staying close to the stockyards, where the air smelled like money and manure. But this was different. This was the summer cattle auction, the biggest event in the territory. Ranchers, speculators, bankers, politicians, and every kind of opportunist west of the Missouri crowded into the auction grounds like wolves circling a carcass. And every single one of them knew Rhett Callahan's name. Abby saw it the moment they rode in, the way people stopped talking, the way hands drifted toward hat brims but didn't quite tip, the way women pulled their children closer and men straightened their spines. Fear. Pure, undiluted, 15-year-old fear. And then, the whispers. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read lips well enough. His wife. Bought her. Whitaker girl. Poor thing. Abby's jaw tightened. She sat straighter on Juniper's back and rode beside Rhett through the center of the auction grounds like she'd been doing it her whole life. Rhett didn't look left or right, didn't acknowledge a single stare. He rode Solomon through the crowd with the same steady patience he gave to everything, unhurried, unbothered, untouchable. But Abby knew better now. She knew the cost of that stillness. They dismounted at the cattle pens. Luke took charge of the herd, directing the hands with quick, efficient commands. Rhett spoke briefly with the auction clerk, a thin man with spectacles who kept glancing at Abby like she might explode. "Callahan herds in pen 12, the clerk said. "Bidding starts tomorrow at 8. "We'll be ready," Rhett said. "And, the clerk lowered his voice. "Mr. Whitmore's already here. Arrived yesterday. He's been, well, talking." "He's always talking." "Yes, sir, but this time he brought a lawyer." Rhett's expression didn't change, but Abby saw his hand close into a fist at his side. Just for a second. Then it opened again. "Thank you," Rhett said. They walked away. Abby matched his stride. "A lawyer," she said. "Heard him." "What's he planning?" "Nothing good." "That's not an answer." Rhett stopped, turned to her. People flowed around them like water around stone. "He's going to challenge the marriage contract," Rhett said quietly. "Publicly. In front of every rancher, buyer, and politician in the territory." "On what grounds?" "Fraud. Coercion. Take your pick. He'll argue I forced you into the marriage to seize Whitaker land." "That's a lie." "Since when has that stopped him?" Abby felt her blood go cold, then hot, then something beyond temperature, something that burned in her bones. "Let him try," she said. "Abby, let him try." Her voice carried. A woman nearby turned to look. Abby didn't care. "I signed that contract with my own hand. I stood in that courthouse with my own feet. Nobody forced me, and I will say that to any judge, any jury, any crowd in this territory." Rhett searched her face. She could see him weighing something, not whether she meant it, but whether he had the right to let her fight this battle. "This could get ugly," he said. "It's already ugly. Whitmore made it ugly the day he put my name on a contract and pretended it was a kindness." Rhett was still for a long moment. Then he did something he'd never done before. He offered her his arm. Not a grab, not a pull, just his arm, extended, the way a man offers it to a woman he walks beside. Not behind, not ahead, beside. Abby looked at it. Then she took it. And they walked through the Denver auction grounds together, arm in arm, while the entire territory watched and whispered and wondered what in God's name was happening to the monster of Colorado. That evening, the trouble started. They were at the stockman's dinner, a formal affair held in a big hall near the auction grounds. Long tables, oil lamps, beef and whiskey. Every rancher of consequence in the territory was there, and so was Whitmore. He sat 3 tables away, flanked by a sharp-faced man in a city suit, the lawyer, and the heavy-set stranger Abby didn't recognize. The stranger had small eyes and a way of scanning the room that reminded her of a coyote circling a henhouse. "Who's the big man with Whitmore?" Abby asked Luke quietly. Luke's face hardened. "Cyrus Polk, land speculator out of Kansas City. He's the one who handles the dirty work Whitmore won't touch." "What kind of dirty work?" "The kind that doesn't leave witnesses." Before Abby could respond, Whitmore stood. He raised his glass. The room quieted. "Gentlemen and ladies," He nodded toward the few women present. "A toast to the finest cattle season in territorial history, and to the fine ranchers who make this land what it is." Polite applause. But Whitmore wasn't done. "I'd especially like to congratulate our friend Rhett Callahan on his recent nuptials." His smile widened, sharpened. "It's not every day a man acquires both a wife and 1,000 acres in a single transaction." Laughter. Nervous, scattered, but laughter. Abby's blood turned to ice. Rhett didn't move, didn't react, sat like he was carved from the same wood as his chair. But under the table, Abby felt his hand, resting on his knee, clenched so hard the knuckles cracked. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't weigh the consequences. She stood. Every eye in the room turned to her. "I appreciate the congratulations, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner. "And I'd like to offer one in return. It takes real courage for a banker to toast the man whose ranch he's been trying to steal for 15 years. Dead silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Whitmore's smile froze. "Mrs. Callahan, I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Then let me clarify. You called in my father's debt, knowing he couldn't pay. You engineered a marriage contract designed to fail. And now you're sitting in this room with a Kansas City land speculator." She looked directly at Polk, who stopped chewing mid-bite. "Planning to challenge a legal contract because it didn't break the way you wanted it to." Murmurs rippled through the room. Whitmore's composure cracked. "This is hardly the time or place for—" "You picked the time and place the moment you stood up and called me a transaction." Silence again. Heavier now. Abby felt every heartbeat in her throat. Her hands were trembling at her sides, but her voice was iron. "I married Rhett Callahan of my own free will. I signed that contract with my own hand. And I will stand in any court in this territory and say so under oath." She picked up her glass. "To the cattle season," she said, and sat down. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Luke Brennan raised his glass. "To the cattle season." One by one, slowly, then all at once, the room followed, every glass raised. Except Whitmore's. He stood with his wine untouched, his face the color of old ash, and his eyes fixed on Abby with a fury that went beyond business, beyond rivalry, beyond anything professional. This was personal now. Rhett leaned toward her, close enough that only she could hear. "You just declared war on the most powerful banker in Colorado." "No," Abby said. "He declared war on us. I just showed up." Rhett looked at her for a long, unguarded moment, and she saw it again, that raw thing in his eyes, the thing he kept locked behind 15 years of walls. Not fear, not gratitude. Something bigger. Something he didn't have a name for yet. The auction started at 8 the next morning, and by 8:15, Abby knew something was wrong. The bidding on Callahan cattle was dead. Pen after pen, the auctioneer called for bids, and the room sat on its hands. A few half-hearted offers, insultingly low, came from faces Abby didn't recognize. The regular buyers, the ones who'd purchased Callahan beef for years, sat silent, eyes down, hands still. "He got to them," Luke muttered beside her. "Who?" "Whitmore, Polk, all of them. They've pressured every major buyer in this room to freeze Callahan out." Abby watched Rhett standing at the rail near Pen 12. His face betrayed nothing, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of a man absorbing a blow he'd expected but hoped wouldn't come. Half the ranch's annual income, gone, because one man with a ledger and a grudge decided to burn it down. Abby's mind raced. She thought about her father, how he'd crumbled under Whitmore's pressure, folded like wet paper, and drank himself into silence. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, standing in a kitchen that was about to be taken from her, wondering how she'd ended up with nothing. She wasn't that girl anymore. She walked straight across the auction floor to a stocky man in a gray hat who she'd watched bid aggressively on every other herd that morning. "Excuse me," she said. The man looked up. "Ma'am?" "You're Tom Jessup, aren't you? You buy for the meatpackers in Kansas City." "I am." "You bid on the Durango herd, the Fort Collins herd, the Pueblo herd. But you haven't touched Callahan cattle." Jessup shifted uncomfortably. "Market's soft today." "Market's not soft. Your wallet's being squeezed. Whitmore told you to stay off our herd, or he'd call in your line of credit." Jessup's face went pale. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "I think you do." Abby stepped closer, dropped her voice. "I also think you've bought Callahan beef for 6 years because it's the best in the territory, and you know it." "So here's what I'm offering. Direct sale, outside the auction, at last year's price. No middleman, no Whitmore. Cash on delivery." Jessup stared at her. "That's not how it's done." "It is now." He looked past her toward the auction floor, where Whitmore's lawyer was whispering in the auctioneer's ear. "If Whitmore finds out—" "Whitmore is going to find out a lot of things before this week is over. The question is whether you want to be on the right side of it." Jessup chewed his lip, looked at her, looked at the cattle, looked back at her. "Last year's price?" "Every head." "You got the authority to make that deal?" Abby didn't hesitate. "I'm Mrs. Callahan. That's all the authority I need." Jessup stuck out his hand. Abby shook it. Hard. She found Rhett by the pens 20 minutes later. He was leaning against the rail, staring at his cattle with the quiet devastation of a man watching his year's work get swallowed by a single act of malice. "Don't sell through the auction," she said. He looked at her. "What?" "Pull the herd. I've already got Jessup on a direct buy. 40 head, last year's price, cash on delivery. And I'm working on 2 more buyers before lunch." Rhett straightened. "You did what?" "I went around Whitmore. Every buyer he pressured is scared of losing credit. So I'm offering direct sales. No auction, no middleman, no paper trail he can lean on." "Abby, you can't just—" "I already did." He stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You sold my cattle. Our cattle. And you're welcome." Something broke across his face. Not anger, not frustration. Something that had been held so tightly for so long that when it finally let go, it didn't come out clean. It came out ragged and raw and real. He laughed. Abby had never heard Rhett Callahan laugh. Not once. Not in the courthouse, not on the wagon, not at the dinner table, not in the barn. It was low and rough and rusty from disuse, like a door opening for the first time in years. "You sold my cattle," he repeated. "Somebody had to." He shook his head. That almost smile she'd seen before was a full smile now, cracked and imperfect, and the most genuine thing she'd ever seen on a human face. "Abby Whitaker," he said. "Callahan," she corrected. The smile softened. "Abby Callahan." She held his gaze. "That's better." By noon, she'd closed 3 deals. 40 head to Jessup, 20 to a rancher from Wyoming who'd been frozen out of the auction himself and was happy to buy private. 15 to a hotel supplier from Denver who didn't care about politics and only cared about quality. 75 head, sold, at fair prices. Whitmore didn't find out until it was done. Abby was walking back from the Wyoming buyers' camp when she heard the voice behind her. "That was very clever, Mrs. Callahan." She turned. Cyrus Polk. The man was bigger up close, wide across the shoulders, hands like shovels. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Mr. Polk," she said, "I don't believe we've been introduced." "We haven't, but I know a great deal about you." He took a step closer. "Whitaker's daughter, debt bride, plain rancher's wife." "I'm not playing anything." "No, because it seems to me you're playing a very dangerous game." He tilted his head. "Edgar is a patient man. I am not." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. Your husband's ranch sits on land that 3 railroad companies would pay a fortune for. Edgar knows it. I know it. And soon enough, the territorial court will know it too." "On what grounds?" "Fraud, coercion, illegal seizure of Whitaker assets through a sham marriage." His smile widened. "You can make all the side deals you want, sweetheart. It won't matter when a judge voids that contract." Abby's heart hammered, but she didn't step back, didn't flinch. "You tell Edgar something for me," she said. "Tell him I brought every document my father ever signed, every deed, every receipt, every boundary filing. And tell him that if he stands up in a courtroom and calls this marriage a fraud, I will stand up right after him and tell every person in that room exactly how he engineered my father's debt, exactly how he manipulated the terms, and exactly how he planned to steal 2 ranches with a single piece of paper." Polk's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted. "You've got spine, Mrs. Callahan. I'll give you that." "I've got more than spine. I've got proof." Polk studied her for a long moment. Then he tipped his hat, a gesture that held no respect, and walked away. Abby watched him go. Then she walked, not ran, walked, behind the nearest building, and pressed her back against the wall and shook. Full-body tremors, the kind that start in your hands and don't stop until they've ripped through every muscle you've been holding rigid. She squeezed her eyes shut, clenched her fists. "You will not break. You will not break. You will not—" "Abby!" She opened her eyes. Rhett stood 3 feet away. He'd seen Polk leave. He'd followed. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing I can't handle." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. The trembling was still in her hands, but her voice came out steady. "They're going to challenge the contract in court. Fraud and coercion. They'll try to void the marriage and seize both properties." Something shifted in Rhett's face. Not the careful blankness. Something darker, older. The face of a boy who'd watched a banker take everything his father built and decided, at 18 years old, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure it never happened again. "When?" he asked. "Soon. Whitmore's not patient enough to wait." Rhett looked at her for a long time. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not romantic, not gentle. The grip of a man reaching for the one solid thing in a flood. "Then we don't wait either," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean we don't let him set the stage. We don't let him choose the courtroom, or the judge, or the audience." Rhett's jaw set like iron. "We call him out. Tomorrow. At the auction. In front of everyone." "You want to confront him publicly?" "I want to end this. Publicly. Permanently. No more letters, no more whispers, no more lawyers in back rooms." His grip tightened. "He's spent 15 years making me a monster. Tomorrow, I stop hiding from it." Abby looked at his hand wrapped around hers. Calloused, scarred, strong. The hand of a man who'd rebuilt an empire from 100 acres of dirt through sheer will and silence. "Together," she said. He met her eyes. "Together," he said. That night, Abby didn't sleep in the women's tent at the edge of camp. She sat by the fire with Rhett and Luke until the stars went thick and the cattle lowed soft in the pens. They went over every document she'd brought, every deed, every receipt, every filing. Luke spread them out on a blanket and organized them by date while Abby explained each one. Rhett listened, asked questions, sharp ones, the kind that told her he understood law better than he let on. "This one," he said, holding up a yellowed deed. "The original Whitaker homestead claim. Your father filed it in 63?
62. Before the war ended. It was one of the first claims in the county.
And Whitmore's first loan against it?
68. After the drought. My father was desperate.
Interest rate?
12%.
Luke whistled low. "That's criminal."
"That's Edgar Whitmore," Abby said.
Rhett set the deed down carefully. "Tomorrow, you let me speak first. I'll lay out the terms of the marriage contract. The real terms. 1 year, voluntary, full settlement guaranteed. Then you speak."
"About what?"
"About everything. The debt, the manipulation, the interest rates, all of it." He looked at her. "You said you had proof. Tomorrow, you show it. In front of the whole territory. In front of the whole territory." Abby swallowed. "And if they don't believe us?" Rhett picked up the deed again, held it in the firelight. "They'll believe us," he said, "because the truth doesn't need a lawyer." Luke gathered the documents and wrapped them in oilcloth. Rhett banked the fire, and Abby sat alone for a few minutes in the dark, holding the marriage contract in her hands, that single piece of paper that had started everything, and realized she wasn't holding a chain anymore. She was holding a weapon. And tomorrow, she was going to use it. The auction hall was full by 7:30, every seat taken, every wall lined with bodies. Ranchers, buyers, speculators, wives, politicians, the whole territory packed into that building like gunpowder in a barrel, waiting for a spark. Word had spread overnight. Abby's speech at the stockman's dinner, the frozen bidding, the private sales, Whitmore's lawyer, Cyrus Polk. Every piece of it had traveled from tent to tent, mouth to mouth, until the story was bigger than any cattle auction. This wasn't about beef anymore. This was about Rhett Callahan and the woman who stood beside him. Abby dressed carefully that morning. Not fancy, she didn't own fancy, but clean, pressed, her hair pinned tight, her father's documents wrapped in oilcloth under her arm like a soldier carrying ammunition. Rhett waited for her outside the tent. He'd shaved, wore a clean black shirt buttoned to the collar. His hat was brushed, his boots were oiled. He looked like a man walking into his own trial and refusing to flinch. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said. "Let's go." They walked in together. The room shifted when they entered. Not silence, something louder than silence. A collective intake of breath, a turning of heads, the scrape of chairs as people adjusted to see better. Abby felt it on her skin like sunlight. Every eye, every whisper, every judgment. She kept walking. Rhett kept walking. They took seats in the third row. Luke sat behind them with the documents. At the front of the hall, the auctioneer shuffled papers nervously. Beside him, the territorial judge, a silver-haired man named Crawford, sat with his hands folded, watching the room with the weary patience of a man who'd seen too many disputes settled with bullets instead of words. And on the far side of the front row sat Edgar Whitmore, flanked by his lawyer on the left and Cyrus Polk on the right. Whitmore looked calm. Pressed suit, polished shoes, That same silk and poison smile that Abby had known since she was a girl, watching him sit in her father's kitchen, drinking her father's coffee, calculating the exact moment to tighten the noose. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Before we resume bidding, there's a matter to address. Mr.
Whitmore has filed a formal challenge to the Callahan-Whitaker marriage contract with the Territorial Court. Judge Crawford has agreed to hear preliminary arguments here, given that the relevant parties are present." Murmurs swept the room. Judge Crawford raised a hand. The room quieted. "Mr. Whitmore, you filed this challenge. State your case." Whitmore stood slowly, buttoned his coat, turned to face the room. Not the judge, the room. Because this wasn't about law. It was about audience. "Thank you, Judge Crawford. Ladies and gentlemen, I come before you today not as a banker, but as a concerned citizen of this territory." He paused. Let that settle. 3 weeks ago, Rhett Callahan entered into a marriage contract with Miss Abigail Whitaker, the daughter of a man who owed a considerable debt to my bank. He paced, slow, deliberate. Now, marriage is a sacred institution. We all agree on that. But what happens when a marriage is not born of affection or even mutual respect, but of financial coercion? He stopped, looked directly at Abby. Miss Whitaker was given a choice: marry a man she'd never met, or watch her father lose his land. That is not a choice. That is extortion. Whispers, nods. A few women in the back row exchanged glances. Whitmore's voice softened, the practiced softness of a man who'd learned that a knife wrapped in velvet cuts deeper. "I believe this contract should be voided. I believe Miss Whitaker was coerced. And I believe the Callahan acquisition of Whitaker land constitutes fraud under territorial law." He sat down. The room buzzed. Judge Crawford looked toward Rhett. "Mr. Callahan, you may respond." Rhett stood. The buzzing stopped. When Rhett Callahan stood in a room, the room remembered why it was afraid. Not because of violence, not because of threats, because of mass, the sheer gravitational weight of a man who took up space without apology and spoke without waste. "Judge Crawford," he said, "I appreciate the opportunity." He didn't pace, didn't perform. He stood where he was and spoke like a man used to talking to cattle and horses. Plain, direct, no decoration. 3 weeks ago, I entered into a marriage contract with Abigail Whitaker. The terms were simple. He reached back. Luke placed a document in his hand. 1 year, voluntary. At the end of 12 months, Mrs. Callahan is free to leave with full financial settlement. Land, livestock, and cash equal to the assessed value of the Whitaker property. He held up the contract so the room could see it. This isn't a purchase. It's a partnership with an exit clause. He set the document on the judge's table. "Mr. Whitmore claims coercion. But I'd like the court to note that the coercion didn't come from me. It came from the man who held Samuel Whitaker's debt at 12% interest for 6 years, who refused every restructuring offer, and who waited until the debt was unpayable before offering a single solution: a marriage that he himself arranged." The room shifted. Heads turned toward Whitmore. "I didn't approach the Whitaker family," Rhett said. "Whitmore did. I didn't set the terms. Whitmore did. I signed the contract because the alternative was watching a good man lose his land and his daughter lose her home. If that makes me guilty, then I'm guilty." He turned to the judge. "But I ain't the one who should be on trial here." He sat down. The room erupted. Voices, arguments. The judge banged his hand on the table twice before silence returned. Whitmore's lawyer was already on his feet, sharp-faced, city-suited, the kind of man who charged by the syllable. "Your Honor,
Mister,
Callahan's version is touching, but it ignores the fundamental issue. Miss Whitaker was a vulnerable young woman with no independent counsel, no legal representation, and no realistic alternative. The contract may have appeared voluntary, but the circumstances rendered true consent impossible. I'd like to respond to that. Every head turned. Abby was standing. She hadn't planned it, hadn't rehearsed it. The words had simply risen inside her like water behind a dam. And when the lawyer said, "True consent impossible," the dam broke. Judge Crawford looked at her. "Ma'am, this is an informal proceeding, but I'm the woman whose consent is being questioned, Your Honor. I'd say that gives me standing." Crawford studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Go ahead." Abby stepped into the aisle. She could feel her heartbeat in her teeth. Her hands were shaking again. They always shook, she was learning, right before she did something that mattered. "Mr. Whitmore says I was coerced." She looked at the banker. He met her gaze with that smooth, empty smile. "He's right. I was coerced. But not by Rhett Callahan." She turned to the room. "Edgar Whitmore held my father's debt for 6 years. During that time, my father made 17 separate payments. I know because I kept the books. 17 payments totaling over $2,000. And do you know how much the principal decreased?" She paused. 0. Not 1 cent. Because the interest rate was 12% compounded quarterly, and every payment my father made went straight into Mr. Whitmore's pocket without touching the original debt. Murmurs. Louder this time. When my father finally couldn't pay, Mr. Whitmore didn't offer restructuring, didn't offer extension. He offered a marriage. His idea, his terms, his arrangement. She looked at Whitmore. "You engineered this, Edgar. Every piece of it." "You wanted the Whitaker land, but you couldn't seize it outright because my father's homestead claim predates your bank's charter. So you needed a legal mechanism, a marriage contract that would transfer ownership. And when that contract didn't collapse on its own, you came here with a lawyer and a land speculator to tear it apart yourself." Whitmore's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is speculation." "It's not speculation. It's arithmetic." Abby turned to Luke. "The documents." Luke stood and brought the oilcloth bundle to the judge's table. Abby unwrapped it with steady hands, steadier than she felt, and spread the papers in a row. Every payment receipt, every interest calculation, every letter my father sent requesting reduced terms. She pointed to a stack on the right. And every denial, signed by Edgar Whitmore. The room was silent now. The deep, heavy silence of people recalculating everything they thought they knew. Judge Crawford put on his spectacles and picked up the first document. Read it. Picked up the second. The third. Whitmore stood. "Your Honor, those documents are—" "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore." Crawford's voice was iron. "I'm reading." Whitmore sat. The seconds stretched. The judge read 7 documents in total. Set them down. Removed his spectacles. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "these payment records show a cumulative interest charge that exceeds territorial usury limits by a considerable margin." Whitmore's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. "Furthermore," Crawford continued, "your own correspondence, specifically this letter dated March of '73, explicitly states that the marriage arrangement was, and I quote, the most efficient resolution to the Whitaker liability. Your words, your signature." The lawyer stopped whispering. Whitmore's face had changed. The smooth mask was cracking, and underneath it was something ugly, something cornered. "That letter was a private communication. It's evidence, Mr. Whitmore, in a challenge you initiated." Crawford set the letter down. "Let me be clear.
You file this challenge claiming fraud and coercion in the Callahan marriage contract. The evidence before me suggests that if any party committed fraud, it was not Mr. Callahan. Gasps. Actual gasps. The kind Abby had only ever heard in church when the preacher said something that cut too close to bone. "I am dismissing your challenge," Crawford said. "The marriage contract stands, and I am referring these financial documents to the territorial attorney for review of potential usury violations." The room exploded. Voices, movement, chairs scraping. Whitmore was on his feet, his lawyer grabbing his arm, Polk already heading for the door. The mask was gone now, completely gone, and the face underneath was white with rage. He pushed past his lawyer and walked straight toward Rhett. The crowd parted. Whitmore stopped 3 feet from Rhett, his voice low enough that only Rhett and Abby could hear. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You think a territorial judge and a stack of receipts can stop what's coming? I will bury you, Callahan. I will bury this ranch and everything on it." Rhett looked at him, calm, steady, unmoved. "You've been trying to bury me for 15 years, Edgar, and I'm still standing." Whitmore's eyes flicked to Abby. "She won't save you." "She already did." Something crumbled in Whitmore's face. Not defeat, not yet, but the first crack. The first realization that the game he'd been playing for 15 years had just changed in a way he couldn't control. He turned and walked out. Polk was already gone. The lawyer followed without a word, and Abby stood in that auction hall with her father's documents spread across a judge's table, and her hands finally, still. Not shaking, not trembling. Still. The aftermath happened fast. Ranchers Abby had never met crossed the room to shake Rhett's hand. Not all of them. Some still kept their distance, still carried 15 years of fear in their bones. But enough. Tom Jessup came over and clapped Rhett on the shoulder like they'd been friends for years. The Wyoming buyer brought his wife, who took Abby's hands and said, "You're the bravest woman I've ever seen in a room full of men." Luke stood by the door, arms crossed, grinning so wide his face looked ready to split. But the moment that stayed with Abby, the one that would keep her awake that night and every night after, came later. The crowd had thinned. The judge had left. The documents were wrapped and secured. Most of the ranchers had drifted back to the pens for the afternoon bidding. Abby was standing outside the hall, alone, letting the air hit her face, when she felt someone behind her. She turned. Her father. Samuel Whitaker stood 10 feet away, hat in his hands, shoulders rounded. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His eyes were red, and Abby couldn't tell if it was whiskey or tears or both. "Daddy?" she said. He flinched at the word, like it hurt, like he didn't deserve it. "I was in the back," he said, his voice cracked. I heard everything." Abby didn't move, didn't go to him, didn't reach out. 17 payments, Samuel whispered. "I made 17 payments and I didn't know about the interest. I didn't understand the numbers. I just kept paying and it never—" His voice broke. "I know, Daddy." "You kept the books. You knew." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried. 3 times. You were drunk every time." Samuel pressed his hat against his chest. His chin dropped. "I sold you," he said. "My own daughter. I sold you to pay for my own failure." "You didn't sell me." "I did. Whitmore came to me and said, he said it was the only way, and I—"
I believed him because it was easier than fighting, easier than looking at those numbers, easier than—"
He choked. "Easier than being a man." Abby felt something crack inside her chest. Not the clean crack of ice breaking in spring. The deep, old crack of something that had been damaged for years, finally admitting it was broken.
"Daddy."
"That man in there." Samuel looked toward the hall. "Callahan, he ain't what they say."
"No, he's not."
"He's a good man."
"I know."
"Better than me." Abby closed her eyes.
"That's not fair."
"It's the truth, and we both know it." She opened her eyes. Her father stood there, broken, diminished, hollowed out by 6 years of debt and whiskey and the terrible knowledge that he'd traded his daughter for a reprieve that never came. She could hate him. She had every right. But hatred was Whitmore's currency, and she'd spent the last 3 weeks learning a different kind of math. Abby crossed the distance between them, reached out, took his hand.
"You made a mistake,"
she said. "A terrible one, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. Abby, but you're still my father, and I'm not going to let Edgar Whitmore take that from me, too." Samuel Whitaker broke. Not loud, not dramatic. He just crumpled, slowly, like a man whose bones had finally given up holding him together. He pressed his forehead against his daughter's hand and wept. Silent, shaking, racking sobs that had been dammed up behind 6 years of whiskey and shame. Abby stood there and held his hand and let him. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough for both of them. When it was over, when Samuel had wiped his face with his sleeve and straightened up with the fragile dignity of a man trying to rebuild himself one breath at a time, Abby said, "Come to the ranch." He blinked. "What?" "Come to the ranch. We need someone who knows cattle. Luke's good, but he's stretched thin. You could work the south pasture." "Abby, I can't just—" "Callahan wouldn't." "Rhett will agree." "How do you know?" "Because he married me to save your land. You think he won't give you a job?" Samuel stared at her. "You sound like your mother." The words hit her somewhere deep, somewhere she didn't visit often. Her mother had died when Abby was 14. Fever, like Rhett's mother. A woman who'd run a ranch household with iron hands and a tender heart. A woman nobody had ever pushed around. "Good," Abby said. She let go of his hand, stepped back. "Be at the ranch by Monday. Sober." "I mean it, Daddy. I'll be there." "Sober." "I'll be there. Sober." She nodded once, turned, walked back toward the cattle pens where Rhett was waiting. She found him leaning against the fence, watching the afternoon bidding without really seeing it. He turned when she approached, and his eyes went straight to her face, reading, calculating, cataloging whatever he found there. "Your father?" he asked. "He's coming to work the ranch." Rhett's eyebrows rose a fraction. "You decided that." "I did. You got a problem with it?" He studied her for a long moment. "Can he work?" "He can when he's sober." "And if he's not sober?" "Then I'll handle it." Rhett looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he'd looked at her in the corral when she'd calmed the stallion. The way he'd looked at her by the creek when she'd said, "Together." "All right," he said. "All right?" "Your ranch too, Abby. Your call." 4 words. "Your ranch too, Abby." Said plainly, without ceremony, without a grand gesture or a sweeping declaration. Just fact. Just truth. But those 4 words rearranged something inside her that she'd been holding crooked her whole life. No man had ever said, "Your ranch too," to a woman in this territory. Not to his wife, not to his daughter, not to anyone. Rhett Callahan just did. She turned away before he could see her eyes. "Let's go home," she said. He nodded. They gathered Luke and the hands, loaded the wagons. The cattle that hadn't sold private would be driven back to the ranch, but the bulk of the herd was spoken for. Jessup, Wyoming, Denver. Money coming in, real money. Enough to cover the season and then some. Whitmore's blockade had failed. His legal challenge had failed. His reputation, polished and maintained for 20 years, had taken its first public hit. But Abby knew, with the certainty of a woman who'd grown up watching a snake circle her family, that Edgar Whitmore wasn't finished. Men like Whitmore never stopped. They just changed shape. The ride home was different from the ride in. Abby rode beside Rhett again, but the distance between them had collapsed. Not physically. They maintained the same respectful gap, but the air between them carried a different weight now. The weight of shared battle, shared risk, shared victory. They camped along the South Platte again. Same spot, same fire. But this time, when Luke and the hands drifted off to their bedrolls, Abby and Rhett stayed. The fire burned low. "Rhett." "Yeah." "Thank you." He looked at her. "For what?" "For letting me speak today. For not stepping in front of me." He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. "I almost did," he admitted. "I know." "When Whitmore's lawyer started talking about your consent, I almost stood up and—" "I know. I saw your hands." He looked down at his hands, opened them, closed them. "I've been fighting alone for 15 years, he said. "It's hard to stop." "You don't have to stop. You just have to make room." He raised his eyes to hers. In the firelight, those dark, guarded eyes were unguarded, open, full of something that looked like wonder and fear and gratitude braided together so tight you couldn't separate one from the other. "I've never met anyone like you," he said. "That's because you've been looking at cattle for 15 years. He laughed again. That low, rusty sound. Stronger this time, easier. Abby smiled. A real smile. The first one that didn't carry weight behind it. The fire burned down to coals. The stars multiplied overhead. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, sitting side by side on a blanket by the South Platte River, their hands found each other. Not a grab, not a reach. Just two hands, resting on the blanket, drifting together like water finding its level. Neither one of them mentioned it. Neither one of them pulled away. And when they rode into the Callahan Ranch the next afternoon, Martha was standing on the porch with her arms crossed, studying them the way a woman studies a garden she planted 6 months ago that's finally starting to bloom. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She just went inside and set 3 places at the dinner table. And for the first time, when Abby sat down and Rhett sat across from her, it didn't feel like a stranger's house. It felt like home. But home, Abby was learning, was something you had to defend. And the next fight was already on its way. Because that same evening, in Boulder, Edgar Whitmore sat in his darkened office with a glass of whiskey and a telegram from Kansas City. The telegram read, "Polk arriving with survey team Tuesday. Stop. Railroad easement filing prepared. Stop. Territorial claim will bypass marriage contract. Stop. Advise proceed. Stop." Whitmore set down the telegram, picked up his pen, and wrote one word across the bottom. Proceed. Polk's survey team arrived on a Tuesday morning, just like the telegram promised. Abby spotted them from the porch. 4 men on horseback and a wagon loaded with surveying equipment, riding up the main road like they owned it. Polk sat in front, that same coyote smile stretching across his wide face, a rolled document in his hand like a club. She didn't wait for them to reach the house. She walked straight down the steps and planted herself in the road.
"This is private property," she said.
Polk reined up, looked down at her. "Mornin', Mrs. Callahan. Beautiful day for a survey."
"There's nothing to survey. You're on Callahan land."
Actually, Polk unrolled the document with one hand, a theatrical flourish that made her skin crawl. According to a territorial easement filed yesterday with the land office in Denver, the Colorado Western Railroad has a right-of-way claim on a corridor running directly through your north pasture. 1,200 feet wide, 4 miles long. Abby's stomach dropped.
"That easement doesn't exist."
"It does now." Polk handed the document down to her. "Filed, stamped, and recorded. Legal as Sunday." Abby took it, read it. Her hands didn't shake. She wouldn't give him that. But her blood ran cold. The easement was backdated, filed under an obscure provision of the Territorial Railroad Act of 1867 that allowed right-of-way claims on undeveloped or underutilized land adjacent to proposed rail corridors. The filing bore 3 signatures: a railroad executive, a territorial clerk, and Edgar Whitmore as consulting party.
"This is fraud,"
Abby said. "This is progress, sweetheart." Polk gathered his reins. "Now step aside. We've got work to do."
"You're not setting one stake on this land."
"The territorial government says different."
"The territorial government didn't sign this. A bought clerk signed this."
Polk's smile faded a degree. "Careful, Mrs. Callahan. Accusations like that can land a woman in trouble."
"So can trespassing. And you're about 3 seconds from finding out how much trouble."
The click of a rifle action came from behind her. Luke Brennan stood at the corner of the barn, Winchester leveled at a casual angle that was anything but casual. Behind him, 2 ranch hands had appeared, Colton and a thick-armed man named Davis, both armed, both still, both watching Polk's men with the flat patience of men who'd been paid to work cattle but wouldn't mind a change of pace. Polk's surveyors shifted in their saddles. One reached for his hip. "I wouldn't," Luke said. The hands stopped. Polk looked at Luke, looked at Abby, looked at the rifle. "Where's your husband, Mrs. Callahan?"
"Right here."
Rhett's voice came from the porch. He walked down the steps. No hurry, no urgency. Moving with that same gravitational steadiness that made people clear the way without knowing why. He stopped beside Abby, looked at the document in her hands, then looked at Polk. "Backdated easement," he said, not a question. "Legal filing," Polk corrected. "Filed by Whitmore." "Filed by the Colorado Western Railroad. Mr. Whitmore is merely a consulting party." "There is no Colorado Western Railroad." Rhett's voice was flat.
"I checked the territorial registry after Denver.
No charter, no articles of incorporation, no board of directors. It's a paper company. Created last week." Polk's smile finally died. "You made a mistake, Polk," Rhett said. "You came to my land with a forged document backed by a fictional railroad, and you brought 4 men. He glanced at Luke, at Colton, at Davis. "I've got 12. As if on cue, more hands appeared. From the barn, from the bunkhouse, from the corral. Ranch workers, every one of them. Sun-hardened, quiet, loyal. Not gunfighters. Working men. But working men who'd been treated fairly for 15 years and knew exactly what kind of boss they were standing behind." Polk counted heads. His jaw tightened. "This isn't over, Callahan." "It's been over for a long time, Polk. You just didn't know it." Polk yanked his horse around. His surveyors followed.
The wagon creaked in a wide circle,
and the whole party retreated down the road at a pace that was trying very hard not to look like running. Luke lowered the Winchester. "Think you'll be back?" "No," Rhett said, "but Whitmore will try something else." Abby held up the forged easement. "Not if I get to Denver first." Rhett looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Judge Crawford needs to see this document. And I'm thinking the territorial attorney who's already reviewing Whitmore's usury charges would be very interested to learn that Edgar Whitmore is now filing fraudulent railroad easements through shell companies." "That's a 2-day ride." "Then I'd better leave now." "Abby." "Don't tell me it's dangerous. Don't tell me to wait. Don't tell me you'll handle it." She folded the document and tucked it inside her coat. "I kept my father's books for 3 years. I stood up in that auction hall and took Whitmore apart with receipts. I just faced down Cyrus Polk in our own road. I can ride to Denver and hand a judge a piece of paper." Rhett was quiet for a long moment. The ranch hummed around them. Horses, cattle, men returning to work. "Take Luke with you," he said. "I don't need take Luke. Not because you can't do it alone. Because I can't stand here for 2 days not knowing if you're safe." The words landed on her like a hand against her cheek. Gentle, warm, terrifying in their honesty. She swallowed. "All right. Luke comes." "Thank you." "You're welcome. Now stop worrying and go check the north pasture. If Polk's been up there, I want to know if he touched anything." Rhett almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She almost smiled back. Better. Abby and Luke rode out within the hour. They made Denver in a day and a half. Hard riding, minimal rest. Luke grumbling about the pace every 10 miles while somehow keeping up without complaint. She went straight to Judge Crawford's office. Crawford read the forged easement twice. Called in his clerk. Had the territorial registry checked. "No Colorado Western Railroad exists in any filed charter," the clerk confirmed. Crawford removed his spectacles and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Callahan, do you understand what this document represents?" "A forged railroad easement designed to seize Callahan land through a legal back door." "It represents a felony. Filing a fraudulent territorial claim is a criminal offense." "I'm aware." "And you're prepared to testify?" "I've been prepared since the day Edgar Whitmore walked into my father's kitchen and pretended to be a friend." Crawford studied her. "You know, Mrs. Callahan, most women in your position would have accepted the situation and stayed quiet." "Most women in my position weren't given a choice, Your Honor. I was." Crawford put his spectacles back on. "I'm issuing a warrant for Edgar Whitmore's arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to file false territorial claims. I'm also freezing all assets held by the First Bank of Boulder, pending investigation." Abby's heart hammered. "All assets?" "Every account, every loan, every piece of paper with his name on it." Crawford signed the warrant with a heavy hand. "This man has been operating outside the law for years. It stops today." Luke drove her to the telegraph office. She sent one message to Rhett. 4 words. "Warrant issued. Coming home." They rode back faster than they'd come. She reached the ranch at dusk on the second day, sore in every muscle, dust-caked, exhausted, and alive in a way she hadn't felt since the day she signed that marriage contract. Rhett was waiting at the gate, not on the porch, not in the barn. At the gate, like he'd been standing there since she left. She dismounted, her legs nearly buckled. Juniper was lathered and blowing hard.
"It's done," she said. "Crawford issued a warrant. Whitmore's assets are frozen. Every loan, every account."
Rhett took Juniper's reins.
His eye searched her face. Not for information, she realized. For damage. Checking if she was hurt. If something had broken. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm tired, I'm sore, and I need a bath." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes. "I'm all right, Rhett. I'm better than all right." He held her gaze for a long time. Then he nodded, led Juniper toward the barn, walked beside Abby without touching her, without speaking, without needing to. Martha had dinner waiting. Hot food, clean water, fresh bread. Abby ate like she hadn't eaten in days, because she hadn't, not properly. Luke ate twice as much and fell asleep in his chair before dessert. After dinner, Rhett walked Abby to her room, stopped at the door. Same place he always stopped. Same threshold he never crossed. "Abby?"
"Yeah, what you did. Riding to Denver, facing Crawford alone, getting that warrant. Luke was with me. Luke was on a horse. You were in the room." He paused. "No one's ever fought for this ranch the way you did." "I wasn't fighting for the ranch." He blinked. "Then what were you fighting for?" She looked at him. This man, this quiet, steady, misunderstood man who had spent 15 years building walls so high that even his own heart couldn't climb over them. The man who'd locked her door from the outside to prove he was safe. The man who talked to horses like they were the only ones worth trusting. The man the whole territory called a monster because one greedy banker had decided that fear was cheaper than competition. "You," she said. "I was fighting for you." Something shattered in Rep Callahan's face. Not cracked, not fractured. Shattered. Every wall, every guard, every carefully maintained piece of armor he'd worn since he was 18 years old and standing alone in the ruins of his father's ranch. Gone. All of it. And what was underneath was not a monster. Not a myth. Not a legend built from whispers and fear. Just a man. A man looking at a woman with eyes so full of everything he'd never allowed himself to feel that he couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Couldn't do anything but stand there in that hallway and let her see him. Really see him. For the first time in his life. "Abby," he said. Her name. Just her name. But the way he said it carried the weight of 15 years of silence. She reached up, touched his face. Her hand against his jaw, rough, warm, real. "I see you," she whispered. "I've seen you since the day you locked that door." He closed his eyes, leaned into her hand, and for one moment, one single, fragile, infinite moment, the most feared man in Colorado territory let himself be held by a woman's touch. He didn't kiss her. She didn't ask him to. Some things needed time. Some things were too important to rush. But when he opened his eyes, they were different. The guardedness was gone. The distance was gone. What remained was open, raw, terrified, and hopeful. "I don't know how to do this," he said. I don't know how." "Neither do I. I might get it wrong." "You will. So will I." I'm not what people think." "I know exactly what you are, Rhett Callahan." She dropped her hand, stepped back. "And I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, slow, heavy, like a man setting down something he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Good night, Abby." "Good night, Rhett." He walked down the hall. She watched him go. And just before he turned the corner, he stopped, looked back. "The door," he said. "What about it?" "You don't need to lock it."
I haven't locked it in weeks. Something crossed his face. Not a smile.
Not yet, but the beginning of one. The first green shoot of something that had been buried so deep and so long that the light almost hurt. "I know," he said, and walked away. The warrant was served 3 days later. Territorial marshals rode into Boulder on a Thursday morning and arrested Edgar Whitmore at his desk. The charges were read in front of his own bank: fraud, forgery, usury, conspiracy, filing false territorial claims. His assets were seized. His accounts were frozen. His bank was placed under territorial receivership. The news traveled faster than wildfire. By Friday, every ranch in the valley knew. By Saturday, the Denver papers carried the story. By Sunday, people who had whispered about Rhett Callahan for 15 years started whispering something different. Not monster. Not killer. Not the man who buries men without graves. They whispered her name, Abby Callahan, the woman who brought receipts to a gunfight and won. Summer burned on. The ranch ran hard and smooth. Abby restructured the household accounts, streamlined supply orders, and established a medical fund for injured workers, something no ranch in the territory had ever done. She started literacy lessons for the workers' children 3 evenings a week, using books she ordered from Denver with money she'd saved from the direct cattle sales. Martha taught the younger ones. Abby taught the older ones. Luke pretended he didn't need the lessons. Then Abby caught him practicing his letters in the barn by lamplight. She never mentioned it, just left a reader on his bunk and said nothing. Samuel Whitaker arrived on a Monday, sober, thin, shaking slightly, but sober. Rhett met him at the gate. The two men stood face to face for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Mr. Whitaker," Rhett said. "Mr. Callahan?" "Your daughter says you're here to work." "If you'll have me." "Can you ride?" "I can ride." "Can you mend fence?" "I've mended fence since before you were born." "Can you stay sober?" Samuel flinched, but he held Rhett's gaze. "I'm going to try." "Trying ain't enough." "Then I'll do more than try." Rhett studied him. 15 years of reading men, their character, their limits, their worth, compressed into one long, measured look. "South pasture. Report to Luke. 6 days a week. Sunday's yours." "Yes, sir." "And Samuel." "Sir?" "She gets hurt by this. I won't forgive it." Samuel swallowed hard. "Neither will I." He walked toward the bunkhouse. Rhett watched him go. Abby appeared beside him. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. He's got a long road." "So did you." Rhett looked at her. "That's different." "How?" "I didn't have anyone helping me walk it." Abby took his arm. "You do now." The 1-year mark came on a quiet August morning. Abby woke early, earlier than usual. She lay in her bed, listening to the ranch wake up around her. Horses, cattle, Martha's boots on the kitchen floor. The distant sound of men starting their day. 1 year. 365 days since she'd stood in that courthouse with ink-stained hands and signed away her life to a man she thought was a monster. She got dressed, went to the kitchen. Martha had coffee waiting. "He's on the porch," Martha said. "I know." "He's been there since 4. Abby poured her coffee. "I know that too." She walked outside. Rhett sat in his chair, the one he sat in every morning, the one that had worn smooth spots in the porch boards over 15 years. He had a piece of paper in his hands. He was staring at it. Abby sat in the chair beside him. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked. He set it on the table between them. Annulment papers, drawn up by a lawyer in Denver.
properly filed, properly witnessed, ready for signature. 1 year, he said.
Contract says you're free. I know what the contract says. You can take the settlement, the land, the money, everything that was promised. I know. You can walk away, and nobody, not me, not the court, not anyone, can stop you. I know, Rhett. He was quiet for a long time. His hands rested on his knees, those big, scarred, gentle hands that had rebuilt an empire, nursed sick calves, and never, not once, reached for her without invitation. I need you to know, he said, that if you leave, I'll understand. I won't fight it. I won't make it hard. I'll sign whatever needs signing, and I'll... His voice caught, just barely. A crack so small you'd miss it if you weren't listening with everything you had. I'll be fine, he finished. You'll be fine, she repeated. Yes. Alone. I've been alone before. That's not the same as fine. He looked at her, and there it was, the thing she'd been searching for since the day she first met him. The thing behind the walls, behind the silence, behind 15 years of survival and reputation and distance. His eyes, not dark, not cold, not the eyes of a monster. The eyes of a man who'd been so afraid of needing someone that he'd built an entire life around never having to ask. And now he was sitting on his own porch, holding annulment papers, asking without words for the one thing he'd never allowed himself to want. Abby picked up the papers. She held them for a moment, felt their weight. Then she tore them in half, clean, decisive, final. She set the pieces on the table. I don't stay because of a contract, she said. I don't stay because of land or money or settlement terms. She reached across and took his hand. I stay because I choose to. Because you gave me a choice when nobody else would. Because you locked the door from the outside when any other man would have locked it from the inside. Her grip tightened. I stay because I love you, Rhett Callahan, and I'm done pretending I don't. He didn't move, didn't breathe. For a moment he was so still that Abby thought he'd turned to stone. Then his hand closed around hers, tight, fierce. The grip of a man who'd been drowning in silence for 15 years and had just been thrown a rope. Say it again, he whispered. I love you. Again. I love you. And I'm not going anywhere. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. He brought her hand to his lips, pressed his mouth against her knuckles, held it there. His eyes were closed, and when he opened them, they were wet. Rhett Callahan, the man who'd buried his pain so deep that even Martha couldn't find it, was crying. Not sobbing, not breaking, just releasing. Tears that ran down weathered cheeks and dropped onto her hand like rain on dry earth. I love you, he said. The words came out rough and broken and brand new, like a language he was speaking for the first time. I've loved you since you knelt in that barn and asked me to show you what to do. That was the calf. It was never about the calf. She laughed, a wet, messy, undignified laugh that startled the horses and made Martha drop a pan inside the kitchen. He pulled her close. Not a kiss, not yet. Just his arms around her, holding her against his chest, his chin resting on top of her head. And she let him. Because some people need to hold before they can kiss. Some people need to know the other person is real, solid, warm, staying, before they can let themselves feel the rest. From the kitchen window, Martha Doyle watched them. She wiped her eyes with her apron, set 4 places at the dinner table, and didn't say a word.
That autumn, the Callahan Ranch entered its best season in 15 years. Cattle prices held strong. The direct sales Abby had pioneered became a model that 3 other ranches adopted.
The North Pasture, the one Polk had tried to seize, produced the highest yield in a decade. Samuel Whitaker worked the South Pasture 6 days a week. Sober, steady, slower than he used to be, but reliable. He and Rhett spoke little. 2 quiet men don't need many words, but what passed between them was enough. Respect, earned, not given. Edgar Whitmore stood trial in Denver in October. The charges stuck, all of them. The territorial attorney presented 17 years of predatory lending, fraudulent filings, and manipulated contracts. Whitmore's own correspondence, the letters Abby had saved from her father's records, became the prosecution's centerpiece. He was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 8 years in the territorial prison. When the verdict was read, Abby was sitting in the gallery. She didn't cheer, didn't smile. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, and felt the weight of 6 years of fear lift off her shoulders, like a coat she'd been wearing so long she'd forgotten she could take it off. Rhett waited outside the courthouse. Same courthouse where they'd been married. Same steps. Same dust. "It's over," she said. "Yeah." "Really over." "Yeah." She took his hand, right there on the courthouse steps, in front of God and Boulder and anyone who cared to look. The most feared man in Colorado Territory, and the woman who saw what lived in his eyes. They walked to the wagon together, rode home together, and that night, for the first time, Rhett didn't stop at her doorway. He didn't ask permission with words. He asked with his eyes, that open, vulnerable, terrified question that had been building since the day she tore up his contract. And Abby answered the only way she knew how. She took his hand and pulled him through the door. No lock between them. No contract between them. No fear between them. Just 2 people who had been broken by the same world, healed by the same fight, and forged into something neither one of them could have become alone. The most feared man in Colorado was never a monster. He was a man who loved so deeply that he locked the door from the outside just to prove he could be trusted. And the woman who married him didn't stay because she had to. She stayed because she saw what no one else had the courage to look for. She saw what lived in his eyes. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.